Zax'thor slouched in his chair, tentacles draped dramatically over the arms like limp noodles left out to dry. His single cyclopean eye rolled lazily around the dingy bar, taking in the motley assortment of aliens hunched over their drink. Most were the usual suspects. Battered veterans trying to forget the horrors they'd seen, fresh-faced recruits eager to prove themselves, and the occasional civilian hoping to catch a whiff of adventure. But tonight there was something different in the air, a palpable tension like the moment before a storm breaks. Zax'thor's eye narrowed, focusing on a group of young soldiers clustered around a table in the corner. They were whispering excitedly, gesturing with their various appendages towards, of course, the human. Zax'thor had to admit even he was impressed. Humans were rare enough in this sector of space, but one wearing the insignia of a war veteran. Now that was something you didn't see every cycle. The alien veteran's curiosity got the better of him. With a grunt that sounded like a cement mixer in desperate need of oil, he heaved himself out of his chair and slithered over to the group. "What's all the fuss about, younglings?" he rumbled, voice like gravel in a blender. The gathered aliens jumped, a cacophony of surprise squeaks, chirps, and one impressive belch filling the air. The human, however, merely raised an eyebrow and took another swig from a bottle. That, if Zax'thor wasn't mistaken, contained enough alcohol to power a small starship. One of the younger aliens, a Valorian with more enthusiasm than sense, piped up. "We were just asking the human about its homeworld. Can you believe it? A real live deathworlder." Zax'thor's eyes swiveled to regard the human. "Is that so? Well then, human, enlighten us. What's it like living on a planet that wants to kill you every moment of every day?" The human grinned, a disturbing display of blunt teeth that sent a shiver through the assembled aliens. "Oh, you know," it drawled, "just another Tuesday." A confused murmur rippled through the group. The Valorian tilted its head, antennae twitching. "But," the human's grin widened. "Exactly." Zax'thor felt a grudging respect for the Deathworlder. It took a special kind of crazy to treat mortal peril as a joke. He settled himself at the table, bulk causing the rickety piece of furniture to groan in protest. "Well then, human, don't keep us in suspense. Regale us with tales of your homeworld's attempts to murder you." The human leaned back, taking another swig from its bottle. "Where to begin? How about the time I went for a pleasant stroll and nearly got eaten by a bear?" The aliens leaned in, eyes equivalent sensory organs, wide with anticipation. "Picture this," the human began, gesturing expansively. "There I was, wandering through a lovely forest, minding my own business, when suddenly, roar." The sudden shout caused several of the younger aliens to leap back, emitting high-pitched squeals of alarm. The human chuckled. "This massive furball comes charging out of the bushes, all teeth and claws and bad attitude." "What did you do?" breathes the Valorian, practically vibrating with excitement. The human shrugged. "Oh, you know, the usual, punched it in the nose and ran like hell." Silence fell over the table, broken only by the sound of Zax'thor's eye blinking rapidly in disbelief. "You punched it?" "Yep." The human took another drink, right in its big old snoot. "Turns out bears don't much like that." "Who knew?" A Zolonian with more arms than common sense spoke up, voice quavering. "But surely that's not an everyday occurrence on your world." The human threw back its head and laughed, a sound that reminded Zax'thor of malfunctioning machinery. "Oh, my sweet summer child, that's nothing. Let me tell you about the time I almost died making breakfast." For the next hour, the human regaled them with increasingly outlandish tales of near-death experiences on its homeworld. From narrowly avoiding being struck by lightning during a refreshing spring shower, which sounded more like an apocalyptic weather event, to casually mentioning how it once had to outrun a tornado just another breezy day in the Midwest. Each story left the alien audience more shell-shocked than the last. Zax'thor found himself caught between skepticism and awe. Surely, no planet could be that hostile to life. And yet the human spoke with such nonchalance, as if nearly dying was as commonplace as breathing. "But wait," the Valorian interrupted, antennae now tied in knots from stress. "How do you survive day to day if everything is trying to kill you?" The human grinned that unsettling grin again. "Oh, that's the easy part. We just kill it first." A horrified gasp rippled through the group. The human continued, oblivious to or perhaps enjoying their distress. "Take Australia, for example. Lovely place. Everything there is venomous, poisonous, or just plain ornery. So what do we do? Thongs?" Zax interrupted, eye narrowing suspiciously. Flip-flops, the human clarified, as if that explained anything. Anyway, we strap on our thongs, grab a can of Foster's, and go surfing with the sharks. The Exolonians' many arms flailed in confusion. But why? Why would you voluntarily put yourself in such danger? The human's grin took on a slightly manic edge. For fun, of course, nothing gets the old heart pumping like a near-death experience before breakfast. Zax'thor found himself chuckling, a sound like rocks in a washing machine. You're pulling our appendages, human. No species could evolve on such a hostile world. The human's expression sobered slightly. Oh, but we did, and let me tell you, it wasn't easy. But humans were stubborn bastards. We looked at a world that wanted us dead and said, "Nah, I don't think so." It leaned forward, lowering its voice conspiratorially. You want to know the real secret to humanity's success? It's not our technology, or our adaptability, or even our charming personalities. It winked, causing several aliens to flinch. It's our sheer, bloody-minded determination to survive out of pure spite. The table fell silent as the aliens processed this information. Zax'thor found himself reassessing the human, seeing past the bravado to the steel beneath. This wasn't just a deathworlder. This was a being forged in the fires of constant adversity, tempered by a planet that never stopped trying to kill it. The human raised its bottle in a toast. To Earth, the planet that tried its best to wipe us out and ended up creating its own worst nightmare instead. As the aliens hesitantly raised their own drinks, Zax'thor couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration and fear. If this was what one human was capable of, what would happen when the rest of their species decided to venture out into the galaxy? He had a feeling the universe wasn't ready for that particular brand of chaos. As the night wore on and the drinks flowed freely, although nothing quite as potent as the human's mysterious concoction, the stories became more elaborate, the laughter louder, and the gesticulations wilder. Zax'thor found himself swept up in the human's infectious enthusiasm, his initial skepticism giving way to a sort of horrified fascination. So there I was, the human was saying, swaying slightly in its seat, trapped between a pack of hungry wolves and a sheer cliff face. No weapons, no supplies, just me and my wits. The Valorian, who by this point had consumed enough intoxicants to fell a small herbivore, hiccuped. "What'd you do?" It slurred, antennae drooping comically. The human grinned, that now familiar glint of madness in its eyes. "I jumped off the cliff, of course." A collective gasp rose from the assembled aliens. Even Zax'thor found himself leaning forward, eye wide with disbelief. "You what?" "Jumped. Right off. Figured I'd rather take my chances with gravity than end up as Wolf Chow." The human shrugged, as if hurling oneself off a cliff was a perfectly reasonable course of action. Luckily, there was a river at the bottom. Unluckily, it was full of rapids and rocks. "How in the name of the seven moons did you survive?" Zax'thor rumbled, genuinely curious despite himself. The human's grin widened. "By being too stupid to die, mostly. That, and a healthy dose of what we humans like to call dumb luck. Bounced off a few rocks, got tossed around like a rag doll in a washing machine, and eventually washed up on shore a few miles downstream. Bruised, battered, and laughing my ass off." The Exolonian, who had been quietly getting drunker in the corner, suddenly perked up. But, why were you laughing? You could have died." "Exactly." The human slapped the table, causing drinks to slosh and aliens to jump. "That's the whole point. We were so close to biting it, but we didn't. It's hilarious." Zax'thor shook his head, eye rolling in exasperation. "You humans have a very strange sense." "Oh, you have no idea." The human chuckled. "Let me tell you about the time I got stuck in quicksand during a thunderstorm while being chased by a swarm of angry bees." As the human launched into yet another tale of improbable survival, Zax'thor found himself contemplating the strange species before him. He'd fought in wars, seen horrors that would make lesser beings lose their minds, but nothing quite compared to the casual insanity of human existence. "Hold on," he interrupted, a thought suddenly occurring to him. "If your planet is so hell-bent on killing you, how did you even develop spacefaring technology?" The human paused mid-gesture, a thoughtful expression crossing its face. "You know, that's a damn good question. I guess we just got so used to surviving against impossible odds that venturing into the cold, unforgiving vacuum of space seemed like a walk in the park by comparison." It leaned back, a wistful look in its eyes. "Besides, Earth might be trying to kill us 24/7, but it's home, you know. We figured if we could handle everything our own planet could throw at us, we could handle anything the universe had in store. The Valorian, who had been listening with rapt attention despite its inebriated state, suddenly perked up. Is that why humans are so good at adapting to other worlds? Because you're used to surviving anywhere? The human nodded, a hint of pride creeping into its voice. Damn straight. Put a human in any environment, no matter how hostile, and we'll find a way to not just survive, but thrive. Hell, half the time we'll end up improving the place just out of sheer boredom. Zax'thor found himself chuckling again, the sound reverberating through his bulky frame. I must admit, human, your species continues to surprise me. I've met beings from all corners of the galaxy, but none quite like you. The human raised its bottle in a mock salute. We aim to please, or terrify, sometimes both at the same time, as the night wore on and the stories grew even more outlandish if that was possible. Zax'thor found himself mentally reassessing humanity's place in the galactic community. He'd always thought of them as an oddity, a quirk of evolution that somehow managed to stumble its way into space. But now, listening to this human veteran casually discuss survival scenarios that would send most species into catatonic shock, he realized he'd vastly underestimated them. Humans weren't just survivors. They were conquerors of the impossible, laughing in the face of certain death and coming back for seconds. And if this was what they considered normal, what would happen when they really decided to push themselves? The thought sent a shiver down Zax'thor's spine, a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. As the first hints of dawn began to creep through the grimy windows of the bar, Zax'thor found himself in a state of bemused exhaustion. The human, seemingly immune to the effects of both alcohol and fatigue, was still going strong, regaling the increasingly bleary-eyed alien audience with tales of its exploits. And then, the human was saying, gesticulating wildly, "Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the volcano erupted." The Valorian, who had long since given up on trying to maintain a vertical position and was now sprawled across the table, managed to lift its head just enough to ask, "Was a volcano?" The human's eyes lit up with an almost manic glee. "Oh, my friend, let me educate you on the joys of living on a geologically active planet." What followed was a detailed and somewhat terrifying explanation of plate tectonics, magma chambers, and the delightful tendency of the Earth to occasionally spew molten rock into the air. By the time the human finished, half the aliens at the table looked ready to swear off planet-side living altogether. Zax'thor, who had seen his fair share of strange phenomena during his years of space travel, found himself oddly fascinated. "So, let me get this straight," he rumbled, eye narrowing in concentration. "Your planet regularly creates mountains of fire that can destroy entire cities, and you just live." The human shrugged, a gesture that seemed to encompass both. "What can you do? And isn't it awesome, in equal measure?" "Pretty much. We've even built cities at the base of active volcanoes. Some people like to ski down them." A collective groan of disbelief rose from the assembled aliens. The Exolonian, who had been quietly nursing its drink in the corner, suddenly spoke up, "But why would you willingly put yourself in such danger?" The human's grin took on a slightly maniacal edge. "For the thrill, of course. Nothing gets the old adrenaline pumping like the possibility of being buried under a pyroclastic flow." Zax'thor shook his head, eye rolling in exasperation. "You know, human, the more I learn about your species, the less I understand you." The human laughed, a sound that by now the aliens had learned to associate with impending insanity. "That's the beauty of it, my tentacled friend. We don't understand ourselves half the time. Makes life interesting, you know." As the conversation devolved into a heated debate about the merits of various extreme sports, with the human enthusiastically describing activities that sounded more like elaborate suicide attempts, Zax'thor found himself reflecting on the strange turns his life. Here he was, a grizzled veteran of countless space battles, sitting in a dingy bar on the edge of civilized space, listening to a being from a death world casually discuss ways to court death for fun. If someone had told him this would be his future when he first enlisted, he'd have laughed him out of the airlock. And yet, he couldn't deny the strange sense of camaraderie that had developed over the course of the night. There was something oddly inspiring about the human's indomitable spirit, its ability to find humor in the face of certain doom. As the first rays of the system's primary star began to filter through the grimy windows, casting long shadows across the bar, the human finally seemed to wind down. It stretched, a series of pops and cracks emanating from its frame, that made several of the aliens wince in sympathy. Well, folks, it said, stifling a yawn, it's been a blast, but I think it's time for this human to catch some shut-eye. Got a long day of not dying ahead of me, you know how it is. The assembled aliens watched in a mixture of awe and horror as the human casually tossed back the last of its drink, a concoction that by all rights should have been lethal several times over, and stood up with only the slightest wobble. Zax'thor found himself rising as well, his bulky form towering over the human. Wait, he rumbled, surprising himself with a note of, was that concern in his voice? You're not planning on piloting anything in your current state, are you? The human's grin took on a slightly lopsided quality. Aw, worried about little old me? Don't sweat it, big guy. I've flown in worse condition than this. Hell, there was this one time on Titan when— No, Zax'thor interrupted, surprising himself and the human with his vehemence. No more stories. No more near-death experiences. At least not tonight. The human blinked, looking almost comically surprised. Well, look who's gone soft on the Deathworlder. Didn't think you cared, Zax, old buddy? Zax'thor's eye narrowed. I don't. He lied, the words feeling hollow even to his own auditory receptors. But if you splatter yourself across the nearest asteroid, who's going to keep us entertained with tales of your species' insanity? The human's laugh was softer this time, tinged with something that might have been genuine warmth. Fair point. All right, you win. I'll crash here for the night, but only if you promise to stick around for breakfast. I've got some stories about Earth cuisine that'll make your tentacles. As the human staggered off towards the bar's lodging area, Zax'thor found himself chuckling. The sound startled him. It had been a long time since he'd laughed this much in a single night. The remaining aliens began to disperse, some wobbling unsteadily on their various appendages, others moving with the careful precision of those trying very hard to appear sober. The Valorian had to be poured into a transport unit, its antennas still twitching, occasionally as it mumbled something about crazy humans and death planets. Zax'thor settled back into his chair, his single eye sweeping across the now empty bar. The place seemed quieter now, almost subdued, as if the human's presence had filled it with a manic energy that was only now dissipating. As he sat there, nursing the dregs of his drink, Zax'thor found his thoughts drifting back over the night's conversations. He'd come into this evening thinking he knew all there was to know about the galaxy and its inhabitants. Now he wasn't so sure. Humans! What a strange, terrifying, oddly compelling species they were. Born on a world that seemed designed to kill them, they'd not only survived but thrived, and not content with conquering their own death world, they'd set their sights on the stars. Zax'thor shuddered, imagining a galaxy filled with beings who considered near-death experiences a form of entertainment. And yet, there was something almost admirable about their resilience, their refusal to be cowed by the universe's attempts to wipe them out. As the first signs of the station's day cycle began to stir the bar's automated cleaning systems into action, Zax'thor heaved himself to his feet. He had a feeling the human would be true to its word about breakfast, and he found himself oddly looking forward to it. After all, he mused as he slithered towards his own quarters, if the human's tales of Earth's cuisine were anything like its other stories, it promised to be an interesting experience. And who knew? Maybe he'd even pick up a few survival tips. In a galaxy that suddenly seemed a lot more unpredictable with humanity in it, a little Deathworld wisdom might come in handy. As he drifted off to sleep, Zax'thor's last conscious thought was a wry chuckle. He had a feeling that the next time he encountered humans, he wouldn't be underestimating them. No, the next time he saw that infamous H classification on a personnel file or ship manifest, he'd know exactly what he was dealing with. Beings who had stared death in the face so many times they'd started to find it funny. Humanity, fuck yeah, indeed. The next morning, what passed for morning on a space station with no true day height cycle, Zax'thor found himself back at the bar, nursing a mug of something that claimed to be coffee but tasted more like liquid entropy. Across from him, looking far too chipper for someone who should, by all rights, be nursing the mother of all hangovers, sat the human. So the human said, grinning over a plate piled high with what appeared to be a rainbow of protein cubes, ready to hear about the culinary delights of Earth. Zax'thor's eye narrowed suspiciously. I'm not sure ready is the right word. Resigned might be more accurate. The human's laugh echoed through the nearly empty bar. Oh, come on. Where's your sense of adventure? I think I left it somewhere between your story about surfing lava flows And the tale of your relaxing swim with great white sharks? Zax'thor grumbled, but there was no real heat in his words. Ah, those were just appetizers, the human said, waving a dismissive hand. Now let me tell you about a little earth delicacy called fugu. What followed was a detailed and somewhat horrifying explanation of a dish that, as far as Zax'thor could tell, was only considered food because it hadn't quite managed to kill everyone who ate it. Let me get this straight, Zax'thor interrupted, his eye wide with disbelief. You deliberately consume a creature so poisonous that the slightest mistake in preparation could kill you instantly. The human nodded enthusiastically. Yep, adds a little spice to the dining experience, you know. Zax'thor's tentacles writhed in a mixture of horror and grudging admiration. Your species is insane. You do realize that, don't you? Oh, absolutely, the human agreed cheerfully. But you've got to admit, we make things interesting. As the human launched into another tale of culinary near-death experiences, something about a cheese that was legally required to be eaten with maggots still inside. His Zax'thor found himself shaking his head in wonder. He'd fought in wars, explored uncharted sectors of space, faced down hostile alien species, and yet somehow this single human had managed to shock him more in one night than all of those experiences combined. It was at that moment, listening to the human enthusiastically describe a drink made from the excrement of a small mammal, that Zax'thor came to a realization. The galaxy wasn't ready for humanity, not by a long shot. But maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what it needed. As the human stories continued, punctuated by Zax'thor's increasingly exasperated questions and the occasional bout of incredulous laughter, life on the space station began to stir. Other patrons filtered into the bar, casting curious glances at the odd pair, the towering, many-tentacled alien veteran and the grinning human who seemed to be regaling him with increasingly outlandish tales. And if anyone noticed that Zax'thor's usual scowl had been replaced by something that might, if you squinted, resemble a smile, well, they were wise enough not to mention it. After all, in a galaxy full of wonders and terrors, sometimes the most surprising thing of all is finding common ground with a being from a world that defies all logic, even if that common ground is built on a foundation of shared incredulity at the sheer audacity of human survival. As the station's day cycle progressed and the bar began to fill with its usual mix of spacers, merchants, and ne'er-do-wells, Zax'thor and the human remained ensconced in their corner, swapping stories and comparing notes on the strangest things they'd encountered in their travels. It was an odd sight, to be sure. The grizzled alien veteran, his tentacles gesticulating wildly as he recounted a particularly harrowing space battle. The human, eyes wide with genuine interest, occasionally interjecting with questions or comparisons to Earth's own martial history. To any outside observer, it might have seemed like an unlikely friendship forming. And perhaps it was. But in a universe as vast and unpredictable as theirs, stranger things had certainly happened. As their conversation wound down, and the human prepared to depart for its next adventure, something about exploring a planet with acid rain and carnivorous plants that sounded suspiciously like a vacation to the human. Zax'thor found himself experiencing, was it regret? Well, big guy, the human said, standing and stretching in a way that made several of its joints pop alarmingly. It's been real. Thanks for the company and the conversation. It's not often I get to shock someone with tales of good old terra firma anymore. Zax'thor's eye narrowed, a mixture of emotions swirling within its depths. You're welcome, he rumbled, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. It has been educational. The human's grin widened. High praise indeed. Tell you what, next time I'm in this sector, I'll look you up. Maybe I can convince you to try some of that death cuisine I was telling you about. I think I'll pass, Zax'thor replied dryly. I prefer my meals non-lethal. The human laughed, a sound that Zax'thor realized he might actually miss. Your loss, but hey, if you ever find yourself in Earth's neck of the woods, look me up. I'll show you what real danger looks like. As the human sauntered out of the bar, whistling a jaunty tune, Zax'thor found himself shaking his head in bemusement. He had a feeling that this wouldn't be the last he'd see of humanity's particular brand of insanity. And strangely enough, he found himself looking forward to it. After all, in a galaxy full of wonders and terrors, sometimes the most exciting adventure of all is simply sharing a drink with someone who sees the universe in a completely different way. Even if that way involves actively courting death on a regular basis, as Zax'thor settled back into his usual routine, he couldn't help but feel that something had changed. The galaxy seemed a little brighter, a little more unpredictable, a little more human. And for the first time in a long while, Zax'thor found himself excited to see what the universe had in store next. After all, if Earth could produce beings like that human, who knew what other wonders and terrors were waiting to be discovered. With a chuckle that sounded suspiciously like the human's infectious laugh, Zax'thor raised his mug in a silent toast. To humanity, he thought, may they never change, and may the galaxy somehow survive their particular brand of insanity. Humanity? Fuck yeah, indeed.